Alright, guys. Hang on. I don't know what to say. Alright. What's up? What's going on, yo? Here we are. We're streaming. We're live on YouTube. Um, I hope all is well. Hope you guys are chilling. And, oh man, just really thinking deeply about this lecture and how I'm going to do it. I probably should just start from the beginning in some sense and just kind of redo it. But I want to focus on the brain part, and I'm just trying to figure out what the hell I'm trying to say, and then trying to figure out, okay, well, what does that mean for everything? And you know, when you start trying to do something, you start realizing, oh wait, there's this, and there's this, and there's this, and there's this, and it kind of just keeps going. It's a rabbit hole. You think it's so simple, but then you realize, wait a second, there's X, Y, and Z, you know? All these different things going on. So, that's kind of what I'm thinking about. Yeah. So, yeah, I'm going to try to put a little more filtering on my light. See how that goes. It'd be nice to have a little, like, sparkle in my eye when I'm talking, but it is what it is. So yeah. Yeah. So we're gonna try to talk. I think we should probably try to talk for about a half hour, and see where that gets us. I think it's probably fine to have the mic right here, and we'll kind of just go. I'm not exactly sure what I want to say, to be honest. So I'm definitely in the midst of kind of restructuring and rethinking about what I want to say in this lecture, in this part of the lecture, but maybe we'll just kind of keep going here. Alright guys, welcome to the Heroes Lecture Part 2. Part 2 version 13. And this is just going to keep getting more and more revamped, and I don't know if customized is the right word, but new parts added to it. Yeah, just, I don't know, upgraded, recalibrated, and we'll see where it all goes. You know, I'm still kind of in this research phase, but I figure it's important to keep recording and just to keep the engines warm. So thanks for joining me. We're gonna see where this goes, really. So yeah, in our last lecture, you know, the Heroes Lecture Part 1, we talked about how mythology, this hero story, is still alive in our world today. And basically it's a narrative pattern where it's like certain basic events unfold, but then you can fill in the details any number of ways. So for example, the idea of like a reluctant hero, you know, a gifted reluctant hero, right? That could be any number of different characters, but that is the pattern. And this hero, this main character is called into a deeper place, called towards some kind of destiny, you know. Maybe by his lineage, he's a prince who gets exiled from his kingdom because of an invading king, right? And his destiny is to come back and reclaim the throne. Like, that could be... So, a reluctant hero who has some kind of destiny laid out for him, and then he goes through a process, some kind of symbolic death, right? These are all sort of narrative patterns. And there's the idea that these narrative patterns are still alive in our world today. These ancient stories that Joseph Campbell researched, and he did this survey of all these different mythologies and put together this consistent pattern that he saw. And basically, this is the same thing that caught people's interest hundreds of thousands of years ago is basically the same thing that captures our interest today, and you have to wonder, why does it persist and why does it remain consistent across all cultures? So that's his thesis and his findings, and we're here to explore, what does that phenomenon mean? You know, what does that mean for us today? And one thing I wanted to talk about in relation to that was how how our perceptions operate. That's the thing I've kind of been thinking about lately, is our perceptions and how they organize themselves. And it's interesting that there's a basic story pattern that we seem to come back to that seems to be the most relevant. These are the stories that are the most elevated. That's sort of Campbell's thesis. Like, these are the stories that get elevated to the top, the ones that guide and bind a culture together, the stories that bind a tribe together, like or sophisticated civilizations like Greek mythologies or monotheistic religions. These are things that bind people together. Why is it that it's only certain patterns that are able to bind? And one thing I've thought about is how our perceptions... Well, first of all, our perceptions organize themselves into the pattern of story. And so, like, when you think about what a story is at its base, a story is... it's a character, a world, and a motivation. And then the action of those three things through time. And that is how our perceptions are generally arranged. So we have interoceptions. I'm trying to think if I should riff or I should just try to like follow the structure, but so we have basically like two different ways of interpreting our reality. And the first one would be interpreting ourselves. So we have these interoceptions that are designed to assess our functionality. We're trying to figure out what our potential for action is. And then we also have these exteroceptions, which look out into the world. And basically, like, when you're born, when you emerge from the womb, right, you are assaulted, inundated, you're enveloped by these what appear to be very intense interoceptions. These sensations that are flooding your system, right? You are awakened with a sense of probably pain. I mean, I don't know what it's like to be a newborn, but you're enveloped by pain. Maybe it could be adrenaline. It could be a lot of things, but so many things are coursing through your body, and almost every newborn baby emerges crying. And it's this sensation of pain that announces that you are separate, that you are other. These sensations are they are like the arm of consciousness. They are the will, like the substance of consciousness. Damasio called the feelings the inaugural event of consciousness. Consciousness, they're like these pain signals, right? They're interpretations of signals. Man, it's hard to know how to do this because I want to try to improve it, but... Right, so they're interpretations of signals that our nervous system... The first thing that's created in the womb is the cardiovascular system. And the second thing, on day 14 or so, they start to put together the nervous system, which is the brain and spinal cord. And then there's the central nervous system, and then these peripheral systems. And these nerves reach out into every corner of our body. They're a communication, and they're like a command and communication network that allows us to regulate the functioning in our body. Regulate it in the sense of control, but also regulate it in the sense of awareness. So we need to be aware of the state of our body in order to regulate it, in order to understand, what we're capable of. That we need to... Man, this is so hard to do. I don't know, because I didn't really have a clear sense of, like, where I wanted to go with this, you know? But, like, we come into the world, right, and our nervous system reaches into every corner of our being. I guess we can... 8 minutes. It reaches into every corner of our being, and it's this reporting mechanism. It's command. We need to understand the state of our physiology so that we can understand what our needs are, essentially. That's what this reporting mechanism is for. And when you think about it, like, pain, it's a signal, but I think is the signal itself pain, or is it just a signal that's interpreted as pain? Our nervous system has this consciousness and consciousness has this motivation, right? All the feelings that we have are biased messaging. They're biasing us towards a particular action. We come into the world flooded with signaling, enveloped in a sense of pain. And what this pain tells us, essentially, is that we are separate. That we are now separate from our mother, right, from the womb, and that we have a will. Pain is essentially the signaling of desire. Need, desire, that it's all on a spectrum, right? But essentially it's a signaling of desire. The desire to survive, but then also flourish, also to thrive. And the problem is that when you're born, when you're flooded with pain, you don't know what the signals mean. You just know that you're in pain. You know that you need something. There's some kind of urgency, urgent messaging happening through your body that you don't understand. The signals don't come nice and labeled to you. You're not able to integrate the signals just yet because you don't know what they mean. And so the first order of business then is to figure out what the pain is trying to communicate to you. And you kind of learn that, I mean, in some sense you learn it by trial and error, but you also learn it from experience from humans, from your mother. That she teaches you what you need, what the pain means. And so you experience alternate forms of pain and then bliss, pain and bliss, right? Pain and pleasure. And all these signalings, your brain starts to analyze the pattern. You are constantly being induced to towards pleasure. Your nervous system has this will, and it's kind of like carrot and sticking you towards where it thinks you should go. And like the calibration of the system is really important. But basically, so what you're doing is you're trying to create these maps, right? Your perceptions are organizing themselves around these pain and pleasure signals. And probably a lot of this is instinctual, that your visual field, you're hearing all these, your brain does not directly perceive things. You're the cat. Your brain does not directly perceive it. It's merely receiving electrical signaling that you don't know yet how to organize. there's a story of a guy who he had some kind of bacterial infection shortly after birth, and he lost his vision when he was, barely a few months old. And eventually they figured out a way to reverse the process when he was an adult, and he got his vision back. But he still couldn't really see because his brain had not learned how to organize the visual field to integrate it with touch and light and patterns and shapes, right? It hadn't depth perception, like it hadn't formed the wiring to do that, and so he couldn't see. And like your wiring is formed, the way your visual field is organized it's according to a will. It's in such a way that you can identify what's out there in the world and then try to match that to your desires. And it's a reciprocal process because sometimes you don't know what you need until you see it, right? And so that's why you're always trying to gather information about the world. And you know that the information that you need from the world is one where you can identify distinct objects, you can understand the concept of space, such that you could move yourself through the world towards the things that you desire. So that means you have to know what you desire, and then you have to figure out how to move yourself through the world to get to those things that you desire. And that's kind of like it's a sensory motor function where you're trying to coordinate yourself to the world in time. So like if you're crossing the street, right, it's a really simple example, like you obviously have to coordinate your movements to these objects that are happening in the world. You need to understand these contexts. And I think what's really interesting about our perceptions, what I'm thinking about now, I guess I'll just riff on this sort of, and we'll figure out how to map this, sort of knit this back into the lecture, but is that our perceptions are inherently, they're archetypal. Like we have all these ways of thinking, these ancient systems, right? They're based on archetypes, like the astrological zodiac, which Jung called kind of like an ancient psychology. Even psychology today, right? We have personality types. And when you think about it, it makes it's interesting that our nervous system is organized this way because we only have a certain number of feelings. In a sense, like you can count on your hand probably the number of different basic emotions that you have. Now there's character and color to each of those, magnitude, right? There's different flavors of each, like happiness. There's different kinds of happiness or excitement or joy or fear or shame or, right, sadness, or there's all these different colors of it, but we can still recognize it as happiness, just like we can organize things into colors. There's many different shades of blue, but we can basically recognize what blue is. And so like our perceptions are inherently typal. We organize things according to types, I think in order, I guess, to save processing space, but we somehow have figured out what's what is good enough, what's important, I guess. And so in the same way that we organize things into types, we do that with everything. So like a chair, for example, what are the essential elements that make up a chair? At what point does it cease to become a chair? And so we have this thing called a chair. We're able to see things compositionally, to put it together, to put multiple pieces together into a coherent structure, a shape, such that we can recognize it as that shape. And then when you do this with personality, it's interesting because we recognize that there are personality types. I mean, there's lots of different pieces to it. Like that, putting together a personality is much more difficult. Like the zodiac, Leo versus Virgo versus Aquarius, right? There's subtleties to each of them, but you can sort of make the outlines of a basic shape. And so this is what we do. This is how we go through life, that we have different parts of our brain that are able to recognize even like social contexts. But what's interesting too is that like how we perceive ourselves and how we perceive the world, a lot of it is just estimated. That we just fill in the blanks according to our experience and our expectations. So, for example, like our visual field, the way we organize our visual field, a lot of it is just filled in. We just fill in the blanks. We kind of make up the differences according to what we expect, and there's lots of optical illusions that demonstrate that. And so a lot of how we perceive something, how we organize sound, we do it to try, like, we organize our field such that we can recognize what things are and how they fit in to the context. We're always trying to figure out a context. Man, this is really hard to explain. I just am realizing that I just have such a long way to go to put this thing together. But it's just that in even like our interoceptions, our perception of self, and even like what we consider our body, our estimations, that they're kind of unstable in a sense, that they're fluid approximations of what we think is actually there. If you ever like stubbed your toe, tripped over like something in the sidewalk, or tripped over something, that was an error in your estimation of how the world was organized. And so you live in this partial fantasy that you hope is mapped as accurately as it can be onto reality. But it's probably not that. You hope that whatever mapping you have is the most effective map that will get you to where you need to go. Because actually, some things are better off not known. Like maybe you don't want to know the chances of accomplishing something, because if you knew the chances, maybe you wouldn't try, and maybe what you're supposed to do is try, though. You know what I mean? Like, there's a way in which you only want to have the map that gets you to where you need to go. And that map doesn't necessarily include all the information. Like right now, I don't know what's on my ceiling. I don't know. I assume that there's nothing up there. There could be some weird like Sideshow Bob chained to my ceiling right now. I haven't checked it in the last, I don't even know how long. It's probably been 4 or 5 hours. You know? And I just assume I assume that it's fine, and it doesn't factor into my map of the world. What I'm trying to do is isolate the things that get me to where I need to go, and that is how we construct our reality. You know, so it's this fluid thing. And then we organize our reality into categories. And we do that, I guess, to save energy, right? I mean, that's the usual explanation, that we do that to save energy because we only want to, our attention is so, in some sense, limited and valuable that we can only focus it on certain things. That somehow, even though our world is a pluralism, there's multiple three-dimensional, myriad, infinite number of things happening at once, we can only focus on one thing at a time. And then we can only express ourselves one word at a time, even though we have a pluralism of thoughts, right? So it's weird that we have to move through the world in a linear fashion, and yet the world is this, what's the opposite of linear? This polyhedral experience, right? And so we typify, right? We see shapes, and then we're able to compositionally organize those shapes. Yeah, it's something like that. And so we typify everything, right? Our perceptions are typified, but then also like our personalities are self-generated. Our perception of world is self-generated. And so, and probably the reason for that is that we have to maintain multiple identities to match different contexts. We have to spin up different selves personas that we express depending on what the expectations are in a given scenario and what we're supposed to do in that scenario. So, for example, how we enter into a bank is going to be different than how we enter into a party. The way we talk to a child is going to be different than the way we talk to an adult, right? And it's like we have this part of our brain that I think it's episodic memory that memorizes contexts, and it develops like this integrative framework of it's an integration of all these different rules and aspects of a given scenario, whether it's a social scenario or I guess I don't know what other scenarios there are. I guess there's biological, like a survival scenario or something, or different climates, or it's like whether you're in a forest trying to survive, or whether you're at a party trying to talk to that girl, or whether you're driving your car down the street in the city, right? There's all these different scenarios that you have to organize in your head, and you organize it into like a character, right? You put it into its own, it's kind of its own shape, right? It's like there's a shape, and then you figure out how to fit yourself into that shape. So it's kind of, and then you think about, okay, right? So you organize the world into shapes, like different scenarios, but then you organize the overall structure into different stories. And so maybe that's kind of like the idea of mythologies, right? These are the archetypal stories that we encounter. These are the principles of the stories, like what is the essence of each scenario. Because like on an extreme example, like if you walk into a bank, I mean, the bank is actually very different than it was the last time you were there. I mean, first of all, you're older. There's a million variables, right? A billion variables that have changed, probably an infinite, if you were thinking of the placement of every molecule and electron. But yeah, for some reason, like that's not the salient information that we need to understand how we're supposed to behave in a bank. And so we extract out the principle. What are the principles that allow us to behave in such a way that we can accomplish our goals in the bank? And those are not totally dissimilar to how we might behave in a library, or how we might behave at the DMV, for example, right? There's a certain decorum. We take that principle and apply it to different situations. And then, so then a mythology would be like, well, what are the most salient patterns that we encounter that create the largest ripple effect? Because, right, narratives, okay, yeah, so narratives are organized in these like pyramidal structures, basically. And then at the top of the pyramid is the narrative that it's like the ring, right? One ring to rule them all, right? There's one ring at the top, and that rules over all the other narratives. And you could think of it like the going to work narrative, right? I mean, there's sort of the immediate going to work narrative, which is like you get up, you brush your teeth, you take a shower, you get dressed, you eat breakfast. Those are all mini narratives, but they all fall under the going to work narrative. So the going to work narrative is what controls all these mini narratives. And then you think, well, what controls the going to work narrative? There's overlapping narratives, right? There's the narrative of I need to pay my rent, right? There's sort of like the survival narrative. But then there's also a fulfillment narrative, a personal fulfillment thing where I want to be a contributing member to society. There's that need to participate in the world, right? And to be seen as a positive force in the world, I guess, to contribute towards the world, right? So there's sort of like a a fulfillment narrative along with a survival narrative, and those two are kind of linked. And then you want to do that because you want to be a good person. I guess you want to see yourself as this upstanding person to be admired by your society, right? And so the need to be admired is kind of this, and the higher up you go, the harder it is to sort of define that narrative. It's like, well, I guess I want to be a good person. Well, why do you want to do that? I guess maybe that is the highest narrative, is to be a good person. I think that's probably true for most people. And then a religion would say you want to do that because you want to emulate God. You want to be closer to God. And so it's like this search for this highest narrative. And then what mythologies do, what these stories, these elevated stories, right? These stories that are put in a place where it's like they're so powerful, they're scary, right? Like the Bible's a scary book because it's going to tell me what I have to do, and it's going to make me do all these things, right? It's going to take over our narrative. That's why we're afraid of these books, right? Quran or the Bible, or those are the two main ones. I don't know what other books there are that people are afraid of, but when you step into a religion, it's this this narrative that starts controlling your behavior, right? You're afraid it's gonna, like a puppet, right? It's gonna start impacting how you interact with every scenario. It's a thing that sits atop all these other narratives. Yeah. Because there's a consistency, even though we encounter all these different scenarios and we have all these different personas. My sister talked about how, like, she's this online dating coach, and she would say, well, who do I want to be today? Do I want to be the person who's looking for the love of my life? Do I want to be the person who just wants to feel good about myself, so I want this guy to go buy me dinner and then I'll just go home and never talk to him again? Or, like, am I just looking for a hookup? Am I, you know what I mean? It's like you have all these different personas, or the persona at your bank, the persona at a party, at a football game, at work, right? But there's some consistency across all those personas. Like, I can still recognize that it's you, even though you're behaving in a different way. You have kind of a different behavior pattern per that social context, but there's something consistent about it. And it's like, well, what is that thing that remains consistent? And I guess maybe that's the thing, whatever that consistent behavior pattern is, that's the thing that the narratives that we tell about that consistent pattern are probably the narratives that get pushed to the top, the ones that engage us the most. Those are the religious narratives. It's like how you approach any given scenario. You want to approach it with honesty. You want to communicate yourself with a sense of, like, to be respectful towards others, right? And to conduct yourself with respect, and to treat people fairly, and to, right? These are things that would apply in any given scenario. To be kind towards people, to bring us to bring a sense of positive energy to an interaction, or and so these are like, yeah, I'm just thinking about how right, it's something about how we organize our perceptions, right? Everything is kind of fractal, that we sort our experiences we integrate them into an overall shape, you could say, right? So right now, like, I'm listening, I have all these sounds coming out of my window. I know it's traffic from New York City, and I'm in New York City. It reminds me I'm in the city that I love. and I've identified what those noises are and when they fit in. They're the background noise of the city. It's just there's an avenue outside and people do traffic there. Now, whenever I hear a noise that I don't recognize, it freaks me out because I don't know what the nature of that noise could mean. Is there some stalker in my shower waiting to kill me, or was it just the creaking of a pipe? I don't know. You know what I mean? Like, whenever, like, it's funny how I don't really notice those noises, but if there's something that sticks out, then I immediately notice it, right? And so it's like I organize everything into a context and I give it meaning. And then once I've situated the meaning of that into the narrative, right? It's basically my perception of the world is part of my narrative, right? World, character, motivation. Once I've organized that, then I no longer, in some sense, I don't have to pay attention to it. And that's my world, and then I've constructed my world into this stable shape. Yeah. And I do that with everything, right? Like I have my field of vision, I can organize them into objects because I've been able to perceive different parts and arrange them into a whole such that I know that this is one object. And even if I look at it from different angles, that image remains stable. It doesn't... I recognize that as its own thing, right? And so then I organize things into shapes and also into types, and so I'm typifying everything. And then I do that with my hearing, and I do that with my textures and with my colors and with my tastes and my touch sensations. Like as I'm touching things, I recognize it, right? And so then of course I would do that under more and more complex systems where you do that with your narrative, right? The world, character, and motivation, that there's different contexts with different... Yeah, and so then you would have these different stories that you organize yourself under. And then these mythologies are trying to pinpoint the stories that can shape all the rest of your sub-narratives. Like it's trying to figure out the key primary narratives, the key patterns that you're using that infuse all your other narratives, right? And that if you can make the adjustment to your master narratives, then you can improve all your sub-narratives. Because you can try to improve each sub-narrative, but it's like you can't... It's hard... Like... I guess... I don't know if you can even do that. Like, you try to just fix your personality at work. But what that requires is for you to fix the core... Yeah, I don't know if you can actually. Like, we think we can improve our lives by improving the outer branches of a narrative, which might be to buy a new car or something, right? To have a really great meal or to go to that next party. But those are merely sub-narratives. Those are sub-narratives, and that will be reflective of how you conceive of the prime narratives in your life. And so then these mythologies, these deep stories, are meant to try to identify those master narratives that control and infuse with meaning all your sub-narratives. And then it's like, okay, what are those master narratives? And we have this instinct or this intuition that there's probably a single narrative at the top of them all. But we don't know necessarily what that is, and we don't know how to access that. And even when we have the shape of that, let's say we become a Christian or we adopt some sort of philosophy, it's very complex to know what exactly the shape of that narrative should be, you know? And then it's like, for me, when I think about this Bitcoin journey, it was a radical shift in my narrative. You know, it was my perception of what my purpose should be in the world and how that fell apart. And I really should start to try to parse that out, I guess. And then when everything crashed around me, I remember thinking, I have this instinct that my life is a redemptive arc. You know, I'm in a narrative of hope. And that narrative buoyed me, and I just thought, am I just making that up? I'm just imposing that narrative. Is it really true, or am I just making that shit up? And I realized, in some sense, it kind of doesn't matter. Because what do you mean by real? I mean, you can't prove it either way. You know, I looked up a bunch of debates, and you can't prove it either way. And this is a narrative that I seem to be able to believe for some reason. That gave me hope. And I was like, I'm just going to believe that then. Why not just believe that? You know, we don't know, actually. Why don't we just test that hypothesis? And that would mean that I should try to live that out, right? Which is like, how do I do that? Well, let's start by cleaning my room, right? I just thought, like, why don't I try to make every part of my life as the best I could possibly try to make it. And maybe I realized that, you know, and I guess I'm not in a hopeful there, you know, it's like, maybe I'm not in a hopeful arc, but you can see how that's a self-fulfilling narrative, right? If you treat your life in the best way possible and just assume, like, if I maximize every part of my life, I mean, I think it's going to get a lot better. I mean, I just don't see how that wouldn't be possible. And so the narrative is true in the sense that it brings me up to this higher place. And so maybe it is true that all of us are in a hopeful arc in that sense, you know? Because if you believe in that narrative and follow its what its implications would be, then you would be in a hopeful arc. That things would get better. And so then that's like a true story, even though it depends on whether or not you believe it. You know, it's kind of this weird, it's this self-reciprocating thing, but at the same time, maybe it's this narrative that's there to be taken hold of. It's a narrative that just exists, and you can take hold of it, you know? And then, attach yourself to that narrative. And that narrative becomes this vehicle with which you travel through the world now. And it's like, yeah, that's kind of interesting, you know? And so then Joseph Campbell's work is kind of like, okay, well, what are these narratives that we keep attaching ourselves to that seem to call to us, right? We discover the narrative that draws us. Peterson calls this the divinity of interest. What is it that draws our interest? Because we can't control it, right? And so what do we keep wanting to attach ourselves to? And then it's like, how far do these narratives carry us then? Yeah, so there's a whole jumble of stuff in there where it's like, it's the identification of the type, right? Just like the way our visual field and our audio fields and our touch, the way we organize all this and the way we identify our functionality, and it's like it's organized into these shapes recognizable shapes, and then we identify situations based on the salient levers that create the causation that we're looking for. It's only dependent upon a certain number of factors that we can isolate and then control, and then that's organized into a narrative, in a character world and motivation. We put that into that narrative structure, and then it's like trying to identify, well, what is the narrative that's ruling all our other narratives? And then you think, okay, well, this is where that narrative lives. This is the ruling narrative. Okay, then we go, okay, well, this is the category of ruling narratives. Well, what's the best ruling narrative then? Because we have this perception, this instinct that we need to be organized under one thing, otherwise we're fragmented. The person who goes to work has a different motivation than the person who comes home. then the person who ends up at the party, then the person, right? There's a fragmentation there. We're over here, then suddenly we're over, like, that creates some kind of stress and anxiety, I guess. And then it's best to have yourself organized. I mean, the problem that I had with Bitcoin was that, like, or with life at that point, why Bitcoin became such an attractive option to me was the narrative I was given was that I need to retire safely. I need to be safe and retire safely. And that was my primary narrative. That's what I thought the primary meaning of life was. And I just found that so fucking absurd. I just hated it. That safety was the purpose of life. And I found that so depressing. I just thought, I don't want to do anything then. No, I don't want, because I want something bigger than that. I needed something bigger than that. I just couldn't, like, articulate that to myself in a way that would help me go, wait a second, like, I need to abandon this job that's providing me safety, because this job is not providing me meaning. It's giving me safety, but it's not giving me a sense of, like, adventure and danger, and there's no stakes in that, you know? And I just couldn't put that together. I think, I don't know, maybe if someone could have given me this lecture, right, of safety is not your highest narrative, that there is a grand narrative that can call to you, like, now how I see my life, the narrative that rules my life right now is this notion of what is the greatest good of which you can conceive. Jordan Peterson phrased that so nicely. And I think what made me despondent was kind of like, I just thought, maybe my dream is stupid, right? This dream that I have, maybe it's dumb. Maybe it's foolish because I'm going to throw away safety for this very risky dream that really has, you know, look, it's a pretty low probability of success, just by statistics, right? Like, who actually rises to the top and makes a career out of YouTube? Like, it's pretty minute, you know, the people who survive to do this, and a lot of it comes down to just whether people like you or not, and a lot of it you can't really control, but it's a start, you know. And I always just thought, you know, with Christianity, it's like, oh, the only way I can have meaning is to, like, convert people to Christianity. I just thought, oh, if I'm not converting people, then, you know, I'm not doing godly work because I'm not converting people to Christ. And it's like, but then when Peterson phrased it like, oh, it's the greatest good of which you can conceive, and he framed it in terms of responsibility and how you can contribute something meaningful to the world, it just changed my conception of, like, I can participate in this grand adventure of greatness, you know, like. And for me, when I think about this channel, I link it to this, I just have this image of, it's just this white light. It's like this pure light. It's kind of like this cloud, almost, this white cloud. I don't know why I have this image. And I just think, like, when I walk down this path of doing this channel, I feel like what I'm doing is I'm walking towards, like, this cloud. And, like, I'm hoping that this somehow, I don't know, like, pleases the cloud, I guess, or something. It's that it's worthy. And so it's a deep sense of mission, you know, it's a deep sense of destiny that I have within me. And Peterson said this thing where he's like, the nobler the aim, the better your life. And so that's the master narrative that infuses all my other narratives. When I go grocery shopping, I'm tapping into that narrative. When I budget, when I go through my phone and write out, you know, $2.90 for the MTA and I budget, it's because I want to make sure that my infrastructure can support my ability to pursue this grand goal that isn't putting food on the table at the moment, you know? And so every moment of my life has a little speck, you know, of that narrative, and that fuels me. That fills me with a profound sense of like that there's high stakes. That there's a difference if I don't do it or do it, you know, like it feels like epic stakes are involved. So like I've identified that narrative, and I put it within the framework of a Christian ideology. And I've never been so excited in my life, you know? Like, I don't want to... I always just used to check my phone and trying to check it. I still look at chicks, but, you know, it's just like... I've always wondered what I'm missing. What am I missing? Oh, I didn't get invited to the party. I want to go to the party. Like, I just was so desperate for something to grab hold of me, and now it's like... I'm just like, I'm cool. I'm like, dude, I just want to do this. Read these books, study these things, thinking that maybe this will get me closer to this goal that I don't know if I can do it or not. That's exciting, you know? And that's like, it just maps right onto your dopamine system, you know? It almost seems trite to bring up physiology, but like, this is igniting every single physiological system that I have. Like, this is coordinating, orchestrating everything to its highest level, you know? It's bringing out every correct chemical inside of me, you know, and it's pushing me to the limit. It's just, I don't know, I can't, you know? And so that's what I'm trying to give to people. That's what I want to give to people, is this sense of mission and feeling, mission and meaning and fulfillment, like, that sits above all other narratives. I mean, it's like it looks like I just see myself kind of looking down at the whole view of everything, right? You can see. I want people to have this feeling, and plus the world needs it. We need people to experience this feeling because this is what the world needs. To have everyone be operating at the peak edge of their abilities, right? And to feel like they're just on the edge of failure, right? That what they're trying to do is so amazing and difficult and fragile and fussy, and it'll disappear, you know, if you don't quite grab it. It just suddenly disappears on you if you have to hold it so delicately. Like, to be in that state is like, it just feels amazing. It almost feels like a weird manic fantasy, but I think it's fraught with enough failure such that I think it kind of grounds you too. Like, you know, you're always so afraid of failing that it's just, I don't know. So this is right. So that's where I'm trying to go with this. And it's like you can only have that with a big narrative, a grand narrative, you know, and then yeah. And I wonder how people do it without that sense of God, you know? How do they do it? People do it. I mean, Dawkins, right? I mean, I don't like a lot of the shit that he says, but I kind of dig his vibe, though, for some reason. Like, he's just down with what he's saying. He's drinking the Kool-Aid, which I dig, you know? Like, he's just, I feel like he's operating in a very high capacity, in a peak, I don't know, and so he finds that inspiration somehow. So people can do it without, like, some weird explicit religious thing. I don't know, yeah, so I guess I'm trying to explore, like, what role does religion... I mean, for me, I think it's everything. I think the Christological narrative is the most complete. I think it captures the grand narrative in the most complete way, that it identifies the problems and the technique and the benefits and the way you move through it. I think it's the most complete way of doing it. The most complete. So I want to guide people towards that, just because I really do think it's the most beneficial. I really see that, you know? Yeah, so I'm trying to relegate everything that I learned to that end. It's hard. It's a bit of an ocean to wade through. It's kind of an overwhelming jungle, but it's something about... I don't know what will get people there. But it's about how we organize our perceptions according to a desire. And that desire necessarily implies a story, and that we're organized into stories. And that, and how, like, the discovery of the larger narrative is how you have to go about selecting narratives. Like, you kind of have to adopt the type of narrative that you want to live by. And there's a danger if you don't, too. That's like, you're just... Well, the thing is, if you don't have that good master narrative, then all your other narratives are just, they're suffering, you know, they're hurting. That's what I think drives all this Bitcoin mania. It's like, you just have nothing else going on in your life. You just have nothing else to look forward to except riches and fame! Riches! Riches! Yeah! You know, it's like, that's it. That's all you got. That's your highest narrative, is being rich. That's your highest narrative. And being seen as some kind of prescient, ahead of your time genius because you fucking clicked a few buttons, read like 3 articles, and bought some coins. Like, that's pathetic. That's really fucking pathetic. I don't know what... Like, that's just... You're gonna hang your identity on that? It's like... It makes me sick, you know? Because I did that. It was... I look at myself, I'm like, Jesus. This guy's like nothing. He's nothing compared to what he is now, you know? Alright, so... We'll see how that goes.